Hi there, ladies and gentlemen, everybody out there listening under the stars. This is the So You Didn't Know podcast. Joining me today, as always, is the incomparable.
Toberto Simpson.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a big groundbreaking show for us today. We found a new way to record, and I'll tell you right now, I think I'm going to be looking at our beautiful co-host more often than not these days. That being said, we got a big banger of a show for you because today we are heading to the sweltering mosquito-infested swamps of South Carolina 39. Specifically, we're going to a place called St. Paul's Parish near the Stono River, about 20 miles south of Charlestown, or as is known today, Charleston. If you picture the American South in the colonial era, you probably think of cotton. But in 1739, cotton wasn't king yet. Rice was king. Carolina gold, they called it. And to grow rice in these malaria-ridden swamps, British needed labor. Specifically, labor that knew how to cultivate rice and survive the tropical diseases. So what did they do? They imported thousands of enslaved people from West Central Africa, specifically from the Kingdom of Congo and Angola. The result was a demographic time bomb. By the 1730s, the Low Country had a staggering imbalance. In some parishes, the enslaved population outnumbered the white settlers by vast margins. We're not talking 60-40 splits here. We're talking significantly higher. The white planters were essentially a tiny, nervous minority sitting on top of a massive population that they were actively brutalizing. They were terrified. They slept with pistols under their pillows. They knew it wasn't a matter of if a rebellion would happen, but when. And ladies and gentlemen, on September 1939, when finally arrived. The Stono Rebellion wasn't just a simple riot. No, it was the largest slave uprising in the British mainland colonies prior to the American Revolution. It was a military operation led by combat veterans. And while it ended in tragedy, for one glorious, bloody, violent Sunday, the road to Florida was paved with hope and fire.
Now, if you're gonna start off such a special show in any way, why not start it off like that? But all in all, the throwing out there of Cotton wasn't king yet, Rice was decent enough in and of itself because that's something that, sadly speaking, is kind of misunderstood. That it was still to this day that it was kind of bigger than cotton when it came to American slavery. It went way beyond that. But just the fact of them knowing that somewhere along the line rebellion was going to come, not just because of the numbers, but I'm sure there were definitely other rebellions to speak of that gave them some type of fear instilled in them. Speaking of, it was bigger than this or that. It was bigger than that Turner as far as slave rebellions. It was a pretty decent amount of them. And just personally, what do you think that says about nature? The fact that people know whether you are the oppressed or the oppressor, that it's simply unnatural and unfitting for anybody to be in such a subjugated position. And if given the chance, a cornered dog will bite. And this is a pretty big cornered dog as we speak, as far as the numbers go.
It is, and what you'll see as we go on, as I said, most of these people that were coming in this early period were still people that remembered freedom. I think it became different in America as you got closer to the 19th century and into the 19th century because you had people that were born into it generations in, and they still yearn for freedom. But the difference is, after this rebellion, you'll see they kind of break the system so that the people that are kept enslaved start having less and less means to do anything about it. And these guys definitely had the means. They were soldiers, they were hungry. And I think, honestly, those Carolina farmers are probably like, man, born into the wrong time period here. Because, and I hate to be that guy, like you said, it's a roll of the dice. It's a roll of the dice. For how many thousands of years did the Greeks and Romans have slaves before they finally revolted? So, sometimes you're born into the generation that is the revolting soldier. Sometimes you're born into it as the motherfucker that Whoo, I got to be a farmer and live my whole life without anyone killing me and having to pay for what I did.
Right, right. I can get that, you know. You know, timing is everything. And truthfully, I think that's seen a lot in history regardless. But definitely something to take into notice. Just being outnumbered 10-1, literally. You ever think about just how much of a mind trip it must be before we move on, just for the enslavers to have a fear of people that you're subjugating. It's a hell of a mind trip, you know, like these are people that you supposedly have under your thumb, you know, but you fear them, especially not even just on a group setting. Like the fact is, I'm sure a lot, especially they had to be fit to some degree. I'm sure a lot of these slaves were pretty, you know, big buck type of guys. And I'm sure when it came down to a one-on-one setting and lots of personal confrontations, they've probably had some level of fear, you know, like if I didn't have a gun or whatever in my hand, if certain circumstances weren't present, this guy, just practically speaking, one on one could take my head off.
It is such a bizarre paradox, truly, as you said, because when you think about it, your whole life you're living in fear of this man that you're oppressing and keeping as property. And the man that you're keeping as property is having this horrible life he's suffering through. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I guess hindsight's 2020. I guess we're looking at it through the lens of 21st century, but you look at it on paper and it's like, what kind of life is that, man? You know, if you let him free and just gave him like I don't know, a tenth of what you're making on your farm, he'd probably stay and do it still.
You know, you ever think that, yeah, some of them had to at least have thoughts like that crawl through their mind, possibly, but who knows?
You know, and it really does make you think, and you got to wonder what went through a lot of the guys' minds that were involved in this situation in particular, because, and as you'll see, it really is a matter of what time you're born in and just the luck of the draw or the misluck in a weird way, depending on how you look at this whole situation. Because I'm going to let you know right now, ladies and gentlemen, spoiler alert to a almost 300-year-old plot twist. It doesn't end well, but it didn't start well either. Before we talk about burning houses or any of that, we have to get to why this happened in 1739. Because history doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens because a guy named Captain Jenkins gets his ear sliced off. We are in the middle of a conflict with the best name in military history, the War of Jenkins' Ear. It was basically England versus Spain, fighting for dominance over the Atlantic trade routes. Now, South Carolina was a British colony, but what is so fun is up until the 19th century, just to the south in Florida, you had the Spanish. St. Augustine was the Spanish stronghold. Spain, being savvy and knowing the British hated them, decided to weaponize the British slave system against them. In 1693, the King of Spain issued an edict. He basically said, hey, if you're enslaved by the British and you can make it to Florida and you agree to convert to Catholicism and serve in our militia, you're free. I don't know why he sounded New Yorker. In my head, he did. So sorry, people, deal with it. They even built a fortified town for these runaways called Fort Mose, or more formally known as Garcia Rey del Santa Teresa de Mose. It was the first free black settlement in what is now the United States. Think about what that means. We usually think of the Underground Railroad going north to Canada, but in 1739 the Underground Railroad went south. The enslaved men in Carolina knew this. They weren't isolated. They heard the news. They knew that if they could march south to the St. Mary's River, they wouldn't just be fugitives. They would be citizens of Spain with land, muskets, and freedom. The geopolitical rivalry gave them a destination.
Yeah, really, there's a lot of just the different connections that all of these things create because it's just a mixture between the relationship between Spain and Britain Then you have these enslaved blacks, being somehow involved. It just shows, and this is kind of jumping ahead, speaking of looking at things through a 21st century view, but it just shows it's kind of a perfect pretext for what they say is eventually going to be, the whole world being one big government, because it's kind of, like I said, a precursor, because that is what's kind of what's happening now. You have the more the more different cultures of the world became intertwined with each other on a business standpoint, the more we pretty much have had to act as one, as cliche as it sounds.
I think you raise a really good point there. And on the way to one global government, I find it so fascinating that, as you said, you see these patterns in history. And does this not remind you, the Stono Rebellion, like a mini version almost of what would come with the Haitian Revolution? That it's literally enslaved soldiers figuring out how to play the game and going, hey, these big white empires hate each other and are trying to kill each other. Let's use that to our advantage and gain our own autonomy.
It was definitely a pretty decent chess move on the King of Spain's part. Nobody can deny that. And, evidently, I mean, it reaped its benefits. It did what it needed to do.
For Spain and for these enslaved people, because I was looking at the numbers and they can't put an exact number on it, but it's believed that thousands, thousands of people managed to escape to Florida and gain their freedom. So think about the weird turn in history that is, that butterfly effect that for the rest of the generations of your family, I don't know, maybe they went back to Portugal, maybe they went back to Africa, maybe they went to Spain, maybe they went and settled other parts of America, but that one key crucial turning point in history that your great 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 so many greats grandfather crossed one river and managed to change the destiny of your entire lineage.
Yeah. I guess maybe that's a potential, you know, butterfly effect moment to be mentioned.
It's just these moments like that in history, they really do. They make you think. And then, if you had any reason not to like the English before in American history, man, anybody that came from English stock seemed to be a dog for quite a period of time. I mean, if it is to be believed that all the presidents of America, save for two, came from the same part of England, then, maybe it's just a trait that is continued. But I mean, you really gotta appreciate the way people were able to play these systems against each other, say fuck the English, and you'll see a few heads get taken before the day is done, people.
I guess it'll definitely have a somewhat of an effect on any black person I see I mean, truthfully, while we're giving out, historical backgrounds to things and stuff before we move on. Anytime I hear or see a black person's from Florida, I just get the impression that there's a good chance they're not black American. And that's simply because, I mean, it's close to lots of other Caribbean places. You know how that works. Lots of them are from Jamaica, Haiti, etc. Shit like that. That's kind of a main question they ask amongst themselves, and I hear in Florida, like amongst the blacks, when they just that's like a key question. Like they say in St. Louis, a key question is, what high schools you go to. A key question amongst blacks in Florida is like, what island background do you have?
Oh yeah, and you see a big population in Florida of different Latin and Spanish speaking cultures mixing. You have a lot of Venezuelans, you have a lot of Cubans, you have a lot of Puerto Ricans, a lot of Costa Ricans. Like it's a blend the same way just as that. So 100%. It is interesting to think just because you're seeing it historically, the ties that they have.
Oh yeah, Florida, beyond the whole welcome to Miami, just image that it has now, it's really, and New Orleans, low key, it's really steeped in history.
Oh yeah, 100%, 100%. And the weird history you see that pops up in New Orleans, like the amount of Italian roots that are there in New Orleans that you wouldn't expect to see in a French-speaking city.
Yeah, and I would be sort of remiss, especially that we're speaking about American slavery. But one of the West talked about parts of American slavery is the fact that like male slaves were raped too. I hear from what I hear on a level that was not all that different from female slaves. And one of the biggest areas that it happened at was in New Orleans. I hear a lot in New Orleans. And do you think that there's some type of connection to the fact that you fast forward till today and New Orleans has a pretty decent population of gay black men?
Correlation isn't always causation. I'm not going to say yes or no, but that is interesting. Maybe it just has a historical significance. And honestly, with the French roots, the French attract a lot of swishy people too, let's be honest. Not that we're hating on the gays, love you out there, but, they usually do portray the French people as feminine, so maybe that's part of the tie-in too. I think though, if you go to any major city with a major population of any group of people, you're going to see more gays within it. But New Orleans, it tracks. You probably see it in LA too, where it's warmer, it's a different climate, it's kind of a party city.
Yeah, I hear you. And like you said, it's not always causation, but there's some type of link. Just like the fact, while we're on the topic, buck breaking, as they called it, having sex with male slaves, it was, or raping them to be more exact, it was really just, it was most popular in the Caribbeans, and they would have like little setups, little plantations set up just for that, just for slave masters to meet up and rape male slaves. And that's why you, in particular in Jamaica, you fast forward till today, they are hell on homosexuality. Like they got a like their little term for it, bati boy, shit like that, and they don't really play about that. And DJ Academics, who's from Jamaica, by the way, he talks about how he really doesn't take lightly to gay comments and stuff like that because he grew up seeing motherfuckers get burned to death over that shit, over being gay or claims of being gay. So it's definitely some type of trail being laid.
Well, and if you look at Africa too, like I don't know if you remember, and it was a viral video everybody was laughing at because it sounded goofy, but when you think about like the actual like whole connection of it, there's the guy that they eat the poo poo. They eat the poo poo. The gays they eat the poo poo, and he's talking about how gay people eat poop out of each other's asses and how unclean they are, and like he kind of had this weird cult following in Africa, the guy that did that video, and you start seeing like there's large segments of Africa itself where, yeah, you probably are gonna get burned to death being gay there too.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, I don't think it's really the connection of them being the people of African descent having that type of viewpoint. I don't think that's the connection because if you, while we're going into it, there's a lady I actually wrote about. She was an ancient African queen, and she enjoyed having sex with women. You
Anna
know,
Nzinga,
I think that's her name,
and she made all of her men dress like women.
hmm and there's they actually had certain names for there were certain names for male on male masturbation. They had certain names and stuff for that existed in the vocabulary. So it was, I mean, it existed. It was there. Uh, just all around, I think it's stuff like that plays into it, and also the fact that I said this in a previous podcast, but as I think as blacks, we often talk a lot and about certain things, and just overall, if I'm just being blanket about it, it's like Nas said. He has a quote saying that Black Americans are the teenagers of the world. And truthfully, I think we kind of gossip a lot about things, and I think people's sexuality and stuff like that is one of them. So there's a lot of oh, he might be gay and gay banter and stuff like that. But as far as being outright homophobic, overall, I mean, if people are going to be homophobic, one place that they're not going to tolerate it in is going to be in the church. And if they do, to a certain degree, I think that plays a big part in showing that they don't have those homophobic tendencies. And if you look at pretty much any black church, or at least lots of them, if they have a choir director, it's somebody who's gay or at least effeminate. And the movie First Sunday plays into that with Cat Williams' character.
Well, and I might be talking out of my ass here, but correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe a part of the correlation with all of this, because it's the same in a lot of Latin communities too, that like a man doesn't talk about his feelings, a man doesn't emote in certain ways out in public, or it makes you feminine, and a man definitely in a lot of places can't be gay. Like you look at Aaron Hernandez, that's a big reason why he snapped and kind of had his weird break because his dad used to beat him and tell him, you're not gay, you're not gay, you're not gay. Follow me here, because Native American communities, certain African or African American communities, certain Latin communities, you have certain Asian communities too. Is it that maybe part of it is that machismo that is like a worldwide universal thing that for any person that was subjugated or kept down or treated as less than or has to stand up to the European powers that be, maybe historically it's, well, my son isn't going to be that way because he isn't going to be submissive to some guy. When you have to overcome already being quite literally submitting to another man that would just, you know what I mean? Does that make sense? I don't know.
And the thing is, I'll let you go on, just for the sake of doing it. But truthfully, I already knew that's where you were going with it and stuff like that. All in all, I don't really know, man, because you know, to to bring up, another quote, this one by you. Well, you say it a lot, at least. We all have the same families. They just come in different colors and shit like that. I mean, yeah, there's shit like that, but come on, you can't tell me. And to bring up another quote that's similar to that, like Steve Harvey said, all Black American Southern white people and all Black American people are pretty much one and the same. And you can't tell me there's not. I mean, white dads in other places too, because I'm not right as I'm saying this, I'm thinking about a potential, a quintessential New Yorker type dad who would probably flip if he found out his son turned gay or some shit like that. Like there's a lot of I mean, I remember watching the Tyra Banks show, and I'm not making fun of this, but it was a kind of a chubby white kid. He was crying, talking about how his dad literally, well, no, he wasn't chubby now that I think about it. But point is, he is a white guy crying, talking about his dad literally beat his ass like fist to face over him being gay, coming out as gay. So yeah, there's a lot of brute traditional male white men who are definitely gonna flip if they find out their son is anything close to that. But go on.
But a big part of it, think about it, Italian, Southern, even Irish, you want to throw that out there. I think a lot of these white dads were also guys that were subjugated at some point in time, if you think about it. Because let's be fair, for a certain time in America to be Irish, to be German, to be Italian, to be Southern
German.
and dumb. Yeah, Germans were treated a certain way here for a long time. Yeah, you weren't considered white if you didn't speak the King's English and were Anglo-Saxon.
So I mean, so basically, a full blown a a literal wasp is what they looked at. Like you got to be white.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Irish people weren't white according to certain Americans here in America for a long time. Like I said, on my dad's side, it's Scottish, and I know like that motherfucker like Persa fucking cuted when he first got here.
But go on though, go on. You were saying that to be all these things, like I mean, I didn't even I guess I mean I can see how you could get the idea of a Italian guy because I said a white New Yorker guy, and yeah, obviously that's a I mean, that's they've pretty much taken the cake for being the stereotypical white guy, you know, Italians and shit. But I get that. And not even so like I said, I brought up them, you know, and I said Southern in particular, and I get where you're going with that. Just all around. I mean, truthfully, man, I think back in the day, it kind of made more sense because, like, back during the 17, 1800s, when people had to get out in the field and literally, you know, crop their way into a living and stuff like that, you know, share their own crops and shit. And even in the, like I say, the late 19th century, it's like, yeah, they were kind of a sort of an oppressed class to a certain degree. They could be seen in that way compared to compared to Northern Wasp, as you say. But I don't know. In the 21st century, could that be the case?
Well, and I think it works in both ways too, that, the people in power also have that weird. Maybe what I'm getting at, here's the correlation and causation, right? Maybe it's not even being subjugated. Maybe it's the weird machismo factor that no matter what, and I'm not saying every man has it. It's a minority now, but it was definitely a lot bigger back in the day. But it's that concept of whether you're the managing class or you're the serving class, my son isn't gonna yield to any man, and to take what you're going to let a man do to you is the ultimate form of literally, laying down for, if that makes sense. I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying it tracks in a weird way that like all of history is based off of men thinking this is how a man should act. And, who cares? Like, I've seen a lot of guys that have sex with other guys that could kill you and me with their bare hands.
I mean, yeah, and I know we've been going on, and I'm glad we have because it brings me to this point. And really, I don't think that's an attitude that men have tried to propagate throughout time that they've constructed and tried to propagate. It's just, I think it's truly just nature taking its course. It's what's gradually and naturally assumed and correctly calculated to be masculine. Because all in all, speaking of gay guys, you know what's the reason behind why there's an obsession amongst lots of gay guys, admittedly from out of their mouths for DL guys, why they don't just mess around with guys who are fully out the closet and avoid all the drama and eventual heartbreak and shit. Because according to their own mouths, coming across a guy who's DL, you know, not out the closet, or maybe all the way out the closet, you know, they from out their own mouths in comparison to in comparison to a guy who is all the way out the closet, it's just more of a masculine vibe. They
Fair
say
enough.
that they say that a guy who's DL, who's not all the way out the closet, the masculinity just hits a bit differently. And that's why you really can't blame women for not wanting to mess with a guy who's DL, who has had a gay experience, because it's like, if gay men are gonna feel that way, if they're gonna feel that they prefer a guy who's DL because the masculinity hits a bit differently, then how do you think women are gonna feel when it comes to a guy who's dealt with a man before, or who's DL and shit like that? Like, you think they're not gonna want to prefer that, and they're gonna want to prefer a guy who's completely straight. So, and that brings me to the point of, it's not something constructed. It's what's naturally assumed to be what it is, masculine. But I mean, and there's nothing wrong with that. It just is what it is.
Fair enough. So, yes, in case so you didn't know, we got them controversial topics. We talk about them polarizing issues that we think about. And when you want to talk about a powder keg of polarization, you need to look no further than what was about to take place in Florida, right? Because we just went over the destination. We need a spark. Historians break the cause of Stono down into three pillars. First, we have the Spanish asylum offer we just talked about, right? It wasn't a rumor. There were actual runners making it to St. Augustine and sending word back. It was a tangible hope. Second, the demographics. We touched on this, but it's crucial. The importation of enslaved Africans skyrocketed in the 1730s. This meant a lot of the population wasn't what they call seasoned or born in the colonies. Rather, they were saltwater Africans. These were people who had been free in Africa just a few years or even months prior. They remembered freedom. They remembered how to fight. They hadn't been broken by generations of chattel slavery yet. Third, and this is the immediate trigger, the Security Act of 1739. South Carolina legislator, realizing war with Spain was imminent, passed a law requiring all white men to carry firearms to church on Sundays. Wait, actually, correction. The Security Act was debated and about to be enforced, specifically designed to crack down on slave movement. The rebels more than likely knew a crackdown was coming. But here's the key timing. As we said, it's everything. It was September. That was the end of the rice season. That meant that the planters were exhausted, many sick with malaria, which hits hard in late summer, and the surveillance was, because of this, slightly more lax. Plus, a proclamation had just been publicly read announcing the war with Spain. If you're going to strike, you strike when your enemy is distracted by war and sick with the flu.
Hmm. Man, oh man. Now, if you want to get into some art of war, 48 laws of power, just all around Machiavellian type shit, then look no further, right?
See,
That's
man, it just goes to show you exactly right that it's not just Machiavelli that was capable of this. It was these guys. It was the Haitians. Man, you want to talk about clever is as clever does.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And first of all, I think the whole saltwater, I've never heard of that, but I've always took an interest in that, the Africans of those times who were kind of fresh, they remembered what it's like to taste to taste freedom, and to breathe and live a culture of your own that wasn't stripped away from you. That was a part of what was always interesting, about the movie Roots to me, seeing how Kunta Kinte, unlike the majority of people he was coming in contact with who were also enslaved, he remembered what it was like for so long to have a culture of his own that was so rich and intricate. And he always spoke about it in deep detail, no matter who he was around.
See, and that's exactly what you're going to see here, that all this great art imitates life, right? And you really see it in this story that, as you said earlier, you corner a fox, a bear, a tiger, a man, anything that doesn't want its freedom taken from it or its life is going to bite back, and it's going to bite hard and run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. That it doesn't really double back, but it kind of speaks on something that was also acknowledged in that movie as well. Just the fact that unlike other people, he didn't just the fact that he didn't want to acknowledge certain language, he didn't want to acknowledge his name as being something else, and just overall that he just refused a culture. It showed that he had the capability to think and to act out emotions and just cognitive thought, which is, of course, something they tried to strip away from being something a part of our identity at the time.
And you want to see a man that really encompasses this. Let's talk about the leader of the Stono Rebellion, the real life Kuta Kinte. His name, or the name history gave him, was Jemmy, or he was sometimes called Cato. Jemmy wasn't a field hand who snapped. All the evidence suggests Jemmy was a soldier. He was an Angolan, likely from the Kingdom of Congo. Now, why does that matter? Because the Kingdom of Congo in the early 1700s was in a state of constant civil war. The men were captured and sold to the British, but they weren't farmers. They were prisoners of war. They were trained soldiers who knew squad tactics, how to handle firearms, and more importantly, how to lead men. Furthermore, the Kingdom of Congo had been Catholic for 2 centuries. These guys spoke Portuguese, which is close enough to Spanish to communicate. They were also baptized Christians and they knew that the Spanish in Florida were fellow Catholics. So when we look at the Stono Rebellion, don't picture a chaotic mob with pitchforks. Picture a unit of Catholic combat veterans trapped in a foreign land, realizing that their co religionists are just down the road, offering them guns if they can get there. Jemmy wasn't leading a riot, he was leading a military withdrawal.
Yeah, man. Yeah. That says a lot. That says a lot. It's a hell of an interesting story. And while we're on the topic, I wouldn't be a good co-host if I didn't, protect us from potential slings and arrows. And for the people out there, yeah, I know it's Kunta Kinte actually was a real life person. It was just, I mean, certain things in the movie Roots were made up and stuff, but Alex Haley, he really does have a distant relative who was Kunta Kinte and was, kidnapped, you know, for the purposes of slavery and stuff like that. But
I
certain
was
things,
giving us dramatic flair.
you know what I mean. People as we know and as we spoke about YouTube, it 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 takes no prisoners. So people out there got the motherfuckers. Kunta Kinte was real, motherfucker. Fuck y'all talking about? Y'all don't speak about no real shit. You always got
Sometimes
those
the
people.
provocativeness gets the people going, though. No, but I feel you.
Yeah, but yeah, just the fact that he was from Congo, which I know has always been a contentious place, and to diving even deeper into just the details of the contentious nature and just I like you going out your way to mention that it was some really orchestrated things going on by people who were on a bit of a high caliber, so to speak.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, you really start seeing what level these guys are operating on when you realize that September 9th, 1739, it It was a Sunday. The rebels chose it for a reason. Why'd they choose Sunday? White settlers are at church, and even though they're supposed to carry guns, their guard is down. In the pre-dawn hours, Jemmy gathers about 20 men near the Stono River. The first target is Hutchinson's store. Now, this wasn't random. This wasn't a smash and grab. It was a tactical acquisition. They needed weapons. They storm the store, right? They kill the two shopkeepers, Mr. Robert and his son. Now, they don't just kill them. No, 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 no. They leave their severed heads on the front steps. This is a brutal move. Yeah, sure, of course. But you know what it does? It sends a message. It's shock and awe. It tells anyone that sees we are not playing. Inside the store, they seize guns, gunpowder, and ammunition. Now they're armed. They raise a banner. We don't know exactly what it looked like. Some say it was white, but we know they marched to the beat of drums. See, in African warfare, drums are the radio. They coordinate movement. They signal orders. By using drums, Jemmy was signaling to every enslaved person within earshot, the army is forming. Fall in. And they shouted one word, Liberty, or possibly Luke, referring to Luongo or St. Luke. But Liberty is the consensus.
Right on. Hey, ain't this some ain't this something that now that I think about it, this predates give me liberty or give me death, you know?
By almost 40 years.
So, yeah, it's like, I don't know. It just makes you think that up until a certain, you think that certain things are really the quintessential or the first example of something being done to a certain extent, like somebody saying, I want liberty and this is what I'll do to get it and this is how much it means to me. A lot of people would look at that as being like the first peak example, Patrick Henry saying that of somebody just stressing the importance of liberty, but lo and behold, you know,
I think it's this call that is as old as man itself, that liberty is something everybody wants, even if they didn't have a word for it 100,000 years ago. And I think it speaks volumes to a person's values and what they believe in life when they're literally willing to give their life for what they believe in. It's the whole, if you don't stand for anything, you'll fall for everything.
oh yeah. And, you know, just the whole, we can take it all the way to get up, stand up, you know what I mean? And just setting aside the fact that, I mean, it's still a song about standing up for your rights and stuff about that, but it's not so much about political stuff as much as it's about Rastafarian thoughts, you know, theology about the afterlife and stuff like that. But that song is a hit at political events, but that's another story. But yeah, fair enough. That's definitely a tale as old as time itself, you know, man, just showing the human spirit that liberty above all above else is pretty much the most important thing that man holds close to his heart.
And you'll see the duality of man here in this story because I think it's the second oldest tale, or maybe it's the first even before liberty, that duality of man. Because as that army is moving south towards Florida, they aren't running through the woods. They're marching down the King's Highway. They want to be seen. They want to gather recruits, and they do. The group grows from 20 to somewhere between 60 and 100 men. They burn houses as they go. They kill white families they encounter, the Godfreys, the LeMays, the Hexts. It's a scorched earth campaign. They burn the houses to create smoke signals, alerting other enslaved people that the rebellion is on. But there is one fascinating exception. They come to a tavern owned by a man named Mr. Wallace. The rebels surround the place. Wallace thinks he's a dead man. But at the last second, Jemmy orders his men to spare him. Why? Because Wallace was known to be a good man who treated his enslaved workers with kindness. They leave him alive and his property untouched. Now, why is this so crucial? Because it proves this wasn't indiscriminate bloodlust. It was a calculated war against the system of oppression. If you were a brutal master, you died. If you retained your humanity, you lived. It was a moral judgment being passed by the rebels.
This is sort of reminiscent of the fact that if you look at history, the Buffalo Soldiers, when they warred against Indians, the difference between them and the carcasses of the white soldiers, the Indians would basically brutalize and do a bunch of humiliating stuff to the dead white soldiers' bodies, you know?
The original
But
teabagging.
yeah, you know what I mean? But examiners, they noticed that when it came to the dead buffalo soldiers' bodies, they always were left untouched. And that shows a certain level of respect that they had for them as men, warriors, etc. And it just shows also in this case that these people held a certain type of, you know, a certain type of air about themselves, you know. It's funny how I always bring thoughts that I don't know if it's just that these were recently in my head, so of course it just so happens, but maybe I thought of it for a reason. But I thought about earlier today that the fact that the term cracker, it didn't come from, oh, you're white, you look like a cracker. It came from you crack the whip, you know. It describes what you're doing in action, not it's not a indictment on you on who you are because of your skin, you know. And similar to this, you know, it's them not judging somebody because of their skin. They see that this person has a certain value of character.
Exactly. That it shows they're like I said, they're not fighting with bloodlust. They're trying to get their freedom and they're trying to clean up house on all the motherfuckers that need it along the way. And I think there is something really awesome to that. That, you were a nice guy, so we're not gonna kill you and burn your shit down, but we're gonna tell you to stand the fuck back.
Right. Hey, all bullshit aside, is it just me? Tell me I'm not the only one who, as you just read this somewhere along the line when you're doing your editing or shit, and when you just read it, you thought about the scene and Do the Right Thing, like Sal the pizza guy, they burn this shit down, but when it comes to the Asian guy, he's like, no, I'm black, I'm black. They're like, no, you ain't black, motherfucker, we black. And he's like, no, no, leave him alone, he's all right. And it kind of made me think about that scene, I'm not gonna lie.
No, for real, for real. Hey, anyway, you gotta connect it. I didn't think about that, but now that you say that, goddamn.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It all connects. I'm sure it was somewhat like that in real life. I wonder if what's his name, Wallace? Yeah. I just wish I could see the expression on his face. You know, the
Just
expression when they laugh.
the
Yeah.
whew. Oh, okay, I'm gonna sit down.
You know, probably went and had some mint julep, then relaxed, counted his blessings.
The motherfuckers that are the militia come by asking, have you seen these motherfuckers? Have you seen these escaped slaves? Like, oh yeah, man, it was fun. Like, why is nobody dead here? I don't know, man. Maybe I'm not an asshole.
Right, right. Like, what's so special about you, huh, Wally? Like, yeah.
Now you want to
You
know
can-
asshole here, man. Someone here that was an asshole throughout this thing, though, because there's always got to be one. And as we're talking, timing is everything, and sometimes timing is your best friend. Sometimes timing's about a bitch. Now let's see if this reminds you any good pop culture references. I want to see what pops in your head after we get through this next little bumper here, man, because the rebels are marching, right? Drums are beating, flags are flying. By sheer coincidence, though, the Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina, William Bull, riding horseback towards Charlestown with four friends. Literally, he rides right into the rebel army. Bull realizes what is happening instantly. He turns his horse around and rides for his life. If the rebels had managed to kill Bull right there, the response might have been delayed for days. But Bull escapes and raises the alarm. The militia mobilizes fast. By late afternoon, the rebels have stopped in a field near the Edisto River to rest. Some accounts say they were dancing or drunk. Now, colonial sources, written by white winners, try to frame them as being lazy or irresponsible. Oh, they found some rum and got wasted. But historians like John K. Thornton argue they weren't just partying. They were likely performing a Congolese war dance, the Sangamento. This was a spiritual preparation for battle, a way to steel themselves for the fight to come. Whatever they were doing, the mounted militia caught up to them. A battle ensued, but it wasn't a massacre immediately. Not immediately. The rebels fought back, but the militia had horses. They had superior numbers, eventually, and Jemmy, along with many of the other rebels, were killed in the fighting. Some escaped into the swamps and remained free for weeks, leading to a manhunt that lasted for months. Those who were captured faced a gruesome fate. The militia decapitated the rebels and placed their heads on mileposts along the road, one every mile. A grim, rotting breadcrumb trail leading back to Charlestown, designed to terrorize the surviving enslaved population into submission.
Hmm. All in all, man, I'm trying to while I try to think about what pulp culture references I can think about, I really find some type of solace in the fact that before they died, they were doing a Congolese war dance. I guess that put them in some type of spiritual setting. It serves some type of spiritual significance. I can see that meaning a lot to them, that war dance.
And that's
Because
100% why I think sorry, but I think that's 100% why they held out for as long as they did. Because it took more and more reinforcements coming to assist this militia to actually end this rebellion.
mhm, because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, it was something that it was basically a form of martial arts that black slaves described they would disguise rather as dancing. So that's pretty interesting that war dances were pretty relevant to African cultures because I mean the thing is the majority from what they say, I mean the majority went out into the Caribbeans period, but the majority of black slaves went to Brazil, I heard, you know. So, I mean, even till this day, the biggest black population period outside of Africa is in Brazil. But
1000%.
but I don't know. The Truthfully, as you were reading this, I was thinking to myself like this in and of itself is really a doper story than Catcher Freeman. I can't lie.
At least it may still end in heartbreak, but at least these motherfuckers were out here like throwing hands, right?
Yeah, and it's real at that. But it's right now, it's kind of giving a horror movie, whatever it may be.
Right, 100%. And you see this a lot. Like when we get to the German coast uprising, you're going to see that a lot. When we get to, well, we already did Haiti. You saw that. In reverse, though, it was the white people they strung up. But sometimes, man, like we said, when it comes to liberty, I feel like brutality is everything to those trying to keep it from you and those trying to gain it.
Oh, yeah. I guess that's what it's all about, the shock and fear factor.
You know, when you see what someone's willing to do to keep or gain freedom, it'll like the head chopping off, the stringing up the people in Haiti, this and that, man. Exactly. Like it really is a mafia style thing almost like, you want to fuck with us? We'll fucking kill all of you. I don't know, man, but you know,
I get that. I get that. I mean, there's definitely a fair factor to their shit. I mean, the whole hanging a motherfucker in an ice freezer, what does that say?
I'm telling you, intimidation goes a long way in both directions. But now, yes, gruesome what happened to them. Awful. Here's the catch, though. As we were talking about before, that butterfly effect is a hell of a fucking bitch. And the rebellion was crushed physically, yes. But the psychological damage to the white power structure, that was permanent. The South Carolina legislature responded with the Negro Act of 1740. This was the Patriot Act of the 18th century, but for slavery. It was a comprehensive lockdown. The act stripped away every tiny freedom that existed prior. So, number one, no assembly. Enslaved people could not gather in groups without white supervision. Secondly, no money. They were forbidden from earning their own money or growing their own food for sale. Number three, and this is a big one, no literacy. It became illegal to teach an enslaved person to read or write. This is the big one. They realized an educated slave like Jemmy, who most likely would have been literate, was a dangerous slave. And lastly, number four, no drums. They explicitly banned drums, horns, and loud instruments. They realized the drum was a weapon of communication. They effectively tried to kill the African culture to prevent another uprising. They wanted to turn those saltwater warriors into a passive, disconnected labor force. This set the legal blueprint for chattel slavery in the Deep South all the way up to the Civil War.
Yeah, man. I truthfully, the whole no drums things, as it detrimental as it is, I mean, it is something that you could see as being really effective because I mean, that was their, as I heard somebody say, that was the first internet, the first long source of communication. Hearing a motherfucker do a certain drum pattern, and just because it's ingrained in the culture, you know that certain drum pattern means something, so you do something back.
1000%. 1000%. And I just can't help but love, because yet again, butterfly effect, oh, how these butterflies affect. You think about the most amazing part about it all to me is literally the fact that you didn't let your slaves have horns, you didn't let them have drums, but you know what motherfuckers did once they got free? You know, y'all made jazz. Motherfuckers made fucking blues. Motherfuckers made rock and roll. Y'all were like, fuck it.
Yeah,
We're still the better drummers, even if you ain't gonna let us play now.
yeah, yeah. That's something. That's something. And truthfully, I don't know. Truth. Sometimes I wish I would have took my ass down to Blueberry Hill, had some conversations with Chuck Berry because it's like, how is that like being at the time when it's a fresh subject, like it's still arguable about who invented this shit and the motherfuckers who did it was they were still around, on the uprise.
100%. And I'll tell you what, he'd probably let you have the conversation in the bathroom of the Blueberry Hill while he watched women pee.
Yeah, you've definitely told me some things about Chuck Berry that I don't know, unflattering. He would have. Yeah, we won't go there. We won't go there.
I'm not gonna say he wouldn't have been a fun hang though. He would have been an interesting guy, one way or the other. That's all I'm gonna say.
But at the end of the day, there's only one father of rock and roll. That's all we can say.
And all that being said, let me go ahead and pop on the glasses here. And let me give what I think might be the best Springer moment we've had on this show yet. All right, everybody. What have we learned today from the blood-soaked soil of the Stono River? We learned that the desire for freedom is universal, and that people will march into the mouth of a cannon if it means a chance at dignity. We learned that the peculiar institution of slavery was never a peaceful relationship. It was a constant state of war held together by terror and legislation. Jemmy and his men didn't make it to Florida. Their heads ended up on mileposts, but in their defiance, they shattered the myth of the happy slave. They forced an empire to rewrite its laws out of pure, unadulterated fear. And most importantly, they reminded us that even in the darkest systems, resistance is always simmering just beneath the surface. You can ban the drum and you can ban the book, but you cannot ban the beat of a human heart that wants to be free. Take care of yourselves and each other, ladies and gentlemen. This has been the Queso You Didn't Know podcast. Any final thoughts? Any closing ideas? Any plugs? Any prayers? Anything you want to throw out there in the world, Mr. Talberto?
Just all above. Be on the lookout. 2026 is fit to be a hell of a year. I'll say that much. And Believe the Cheese, world's most dangerous podcast. TOLBERT Simpson for the Instagram handle. And we'll always catch you in the next one because that's what we do.